Do not move. Do not reach for the reins. If you touch her now, she will go over backward and take you with her. There are 40 cameras on us. I know exactly how many there are. Let them watch. What the cameras did not know was this. The woman standing 3 feet from a 1,200-pound Hanoverian that had just been deliberately spooked in front of the Korean sports press was, on paper, a high school guidance counselor with a sublet. She was 2 weeks late on and a landlord who had stopped fixing her hot water on purpose. Victoria Dudley was 33 years old, from a double shotgun duplex in Whitehaven in Memphis, next door to the laundromat her mother cleaned on weekends. And nobody in that ceremony courtyard, not the chairman, not the lawyers, not the girl who had arranged for that horse to bolt, knew the first true thing about her hands. So how does a stable hand end up as the only person in Seoul who can stop that animal? Why did a 26-year-old chairman of a sports conglomerate keep finding reasons to be in a barn at 5 a.m? And what was in that will, read aloud in a private hospital wing on Ulungdo, that made a whole family go quiet at once? Let me ask you something first. What do you do when you are the most capable person in the room and the room has already decided you are furniture? Stay with this one, because the horse in the courtyard is only the beginning, and I promise you, this story does not end the way you think it will. And if you have ever been underestimated by someone who was absolutely certain they had you figured out, tell me about it in the comments. I read every one of them. It started with a rent envelope slid under a door. 14 months before the ceremony, Victoria was living on the 3rd floor of a walk-up in Yuljiro, close enough to the elevated road that her windows hummed. She had a counseling office with a broken chair, 412 students on her caseload, and one boy named Chunho, whose file was thickening in ways nobody in the building would act on. She had a second job mucking stalls at a private equestrian club in Gwacheon 4 mornings a week, because Seoul is expensive and pride is not a currency here. She had told no one in Korea that she had once been a champion, and she had never heard the name Raeyul Sunwoo. 14 months before the courtyard, at 5:40 on a Tuesday morning, Victoria Dudley found her own rent envelope back under her door. It had been slid in from the hallway side, folded once so the cash inside made a little ridge, with a sticky note on the front in blue ballpoint. Short 2 weeks. We'll discuss. And under that, because some people cannot resist an extra half-inch of reach, a smiley face. She stood in the dark of the 3rd floor of that walk-up in Yuljiro with the elevated road humming through the window frame. And she counted the money again on the kitchen counter, and it was the same amount it had been when she slid it under her landlord's door on Friday. Nothing had changed except the direction the envelope had traveled. The hot water had gone cold 9 days earlier. Not broken. Cold. There is a difference. And every woman who has ever rented from a man who wanted something from her knows exactly what that difference sounds like when the boiler kicks on in the apartment below yours and not in yours. Here is who was standing at that counter. Victoria Dudley, 33 years old, 5'9" in socks, born in a double shotgun duplex in Whitehaven in Memphis, next door to the laundromat her mother cleaned on weekends. Guidance counselor at a private high school in Seoul, 2nd year on a work visa, a caseload of 412 students, and a counseling office with a chair that tipped left if you sat in it wrong. She had a bad knee she never mentioned, and a way of standing that made people think she was taller than she was. She put the cash in her coat pocket, put her barn boots in a canvas bag, and went to work. The chair mattered, in the end. I want you to hold on to the chair. Because at 10:15 that morning, a boy sat down in it, and the leg gave the way it always did, and he did not react. That was the first thing she wrote down. A 16-year-old whose chair drops out from under him and who does not flinch has already learned that furniture is the least of it. His name was Junho. He was in his 2nd year. On paper, he was a quiet kid with declining marks and 11 absences since January, which in that building qualified as a scheduling problem rather than a person. "You missed Thursday and Friday," Victoria said. "I was sick. Both days. Yes." She let it sit. She had learned in Memphis and then in Seoul that the silence after a lie is the most useful tool a counselor owns, because a kid will almost always walk into it. Hyunho looked at the corner of her desk. "My mother went back to Busan," he said. "There is nobody to sign the form." There it was. The form was a medical leave authorization that required a guardian signature. Without it, the absences stayed unexcused. With enough unexcused absences, the school was obligated to begin a process, and the process ended with a letter in a file, and the file followed him to every application he would ever fill out. His father, according to the emergency contact page, worked nights and had not answered a phone call from the school since October. Victoria had already tried the honest way twice. She had gone to the vice principal in February with a written summary, 2 pages, no adjectives, and she had watched him read it and put it in a tray. "He needs a guardian," the vice principal had said. "This is a family matter." "He needs an adult with a pen," she said. "That is a lower bar." "Miss Dudley." He had smiled the way men smile when they are about to say the word procedure. "You are a counselor. You are not his family." So on that Tuesday, with the boy in the broken chair, Victoria did what she could do, which is a smaller sentence than it sounds. She logged the visit. She wrote a note requesting a home visit and routed it to the homeroom teacher, who would not make one. She gave him her office hours in writing, so it was documented that she had. She opened her desk drawer and put a rice triangle and a carton of milk on the corner of the desk without looking at him, because a boy will accept food from a woman who is not watching him accept it. "You have my number," she said. "You do not have to be sick to use it." He took the milk. He left the rice. He came back for it at 3:40 when the hallway was empty, and she pretended not to notice that either. Now, I'm going to tell you the part she had not let herself feel yet. She was very good at this. She was better at it than anyone else in that building, and everyone in that building knew it in the vague, unexamined way people know things they benefit from. And it did not matter, because competence without authority is just a woman doing extra work for free. She could read a kid in 40 seconds. She could not make a single adult sign a piece of paper. That is the exact shape of the loneliness she carried onto the 6 a.m. bus 4 mornings a week out to Gwacheon. The private equestrian club had heated wash bays, a covered arena with sand imported from somewhere expensive, and 31 horses whose annual board cost more than her salary. Victoria mucked stalls, hauled water, swept the aisle, and dumped the wheelbarrow at the far pile where the smell of hoof oil and hydraulic fluid from the arena harrow sat in the cold air like something you could hold in your hand. The staff called her Miss Dudley and assumed she had learned horses in a summer job. She never corrected anyone. There was a trophy shelf in a storage unit in Memphis with her maiden name on it and a photograph of a girl at 19 clearing 5'3" on a borrowed gelding, and none of that had made it onto her visa application. Nobody in Korea knew she had been a champion. That was not modesty. That was a door she had closed with both hands, for reasons that come later. But the horses knew. They always know. There was a chestnut mare in stall 9 named Bright, who had put 2 working riders on the wall of the round pen and who dropped her head into Victoria's chest like a dog every morning at 5:20 without anyone teaching her to. Which brings me to the man who noticed. He came in on a Thursday at 5:15 in a black wool coat with no scarf, and he stood at the arena rail without turning the lights on. Victoria clocked him and kept sweeping. Rich men wander through their own property at odd hours. It is one of the few reliable facts about them. Except he did not wander. He stood in the same spot for 22 minutes, and when the head groom brought Bright out on a lead and the mare planted her feet and lifted, all 4 staff members took one large step back, and Victoria set down the broom, walked into the sand, took the lead rope with 2 fingers, and turned the mare's shoulder away from her own body. 11 seconds. The mare exhaled and dropped her head. Victoria handed the rope back to the groom and went to get her broom. "You counted her strides on the way in," the man at the rail said, in English. Quietly, the way people speak when they have never in their life needed to raise their voice to be heard. I don't know what you mean.
You moved your left hand 3 times while she was walking the aisle, once every stride. He held up his own hand, and his fingers were long, and there was a callus across the palm in a place a callus does not come from an office. You were finding her rhythm before you touched her. People who muck stalls do not do that. Victoria stood in the middle of an arena in the dark, holding a broom, being read like a chart. Some of us just like horses, she said. Some of us do. He almost smiled.
It was the smallest movement a face can make and still be doing something. That was 11 seconds. My head groom would have needed 4 minutes and a chain. Your head groom uses too much hand. Yes, he said. He does. And then he did something that undid her a little, though she would not have used that word for another 6 weeks. He looked at the mare, not at Victoria, and said, "Thank you for not shouting at her." He turned and walked out of the arena, and she noticed the walk, because that is what she does. Very upright, very even. A man carrying a full glass of water across a room and refusing to let anyone see him carry it. At 7 a.m., the head groom said, casually, that the chairman had asked her name. The chairman of what? Of everything, the groom said. Raeyul Sunwoo. He owns it. He owns us. He shrugged. He is 26. She said, 26, out loud, once, in the tack room, and then went to catch her bus. Here is what she did not know yet. Somebody else had already been saying his name out loud for months, in a different building, in a bedroom on the 2nd floor, to nobody. Thelma Wilson was 24, American, and living in Seoul in a way Victoria could not afford to live in Seoul, which is to say rent-free in a building her father owned. Mr. Wilson had come over in the 90s, bought 2 low-rise walk-ups in Yuljiro when they were cheap, and now spent his mornings in a folding chair by the mailboxes deciding which tenants were people and which were problems. Thelma had a photography account, 900 followers, and an internship at an event company that had staffed a sponsor reception the previous October. That is where she met him. She stood in a receiving line at a sports apparel launch, and Raeyul Sunwoo shook 60 hands in 9 minutes, and hers was one of them, and he said, in English, "Thank you for your work tonight," because he says that to everyone, because he was raised by people who taught him to. She had a photograph of it, slightly blurred. Her hand in his head turned toward the next person in line. By March, that photograph had become a relationship. Not a lie exactly, something worse and softer than a lie. She had built a whole architecture on 4 seconds of eye contact, and when everything else about her life felt provisional, borrowed apartment, borrowed job, borrowed city, that architecture was the only structure she had that felt like it was hers. And then on a Tuesday evening, she came down the stairwell and passed a tenant on the landing carrying a canvas bag, and out of the top of the bag came the toe of a barn boot and the smell of a stable and a laminated Gwacheon club tag on a lanyard clipped to the strap. Thelma stopped on the stairs. "You work out at the club," she said. "In Gwacheon." 4 mornings a week, Victoria said. "Do you ever see the owner out there?" Victoria, who had been raised by a woman who cleaned a laundromat and who therefore knew precisely when a question was not a question, said, "I mostly see manure." Thelma laughed. It was a nice laugh, and it did not reach her eyes at all. "My dad says you're behind," she said. "On the rent?" 2 weeks. "He's really flexible about that stuff, usually." Thelma took 1 step down, so she was standing above her, which was the entire point. "You should come by the apartment sometime. We could talk about the water." Then she went out into the street, and Victoria stood there on the landing in the cold with her boots in her bag. The water stayed off for another 26 days. The water stayed off for another 26 days. And I want you to understand what that actually costs, because it is not a plot point. It is a slow subtraction. 26 days of heating a kettle for the sink. 26 days of washing her hair at the barn in Gwacheon in a heated wash bay meant for a horse's legs, at 5 in the morning with the door pulled shut and the water on low so nobody would hear it running.
She kept a towel rolled inside her canvas bag under the boots. She never once mentioned it at work, and she went to work every single day looking like a woman who had a functioning apartment, which is its own kind of athletic event. On day 12, she stopped Mr. Wilson by the mailboxes. He was in the folding chair with a cup of instant coffee and a newspaper he was not reading. "The boiler," Victoria said. "Mine is not on the same line as the others. I checked." "You checked." "I did." "You a plumber now." He turned a page. "You're 2 weeks short." "I gave you the money. You gave it back." "I gave it back because I don't take partial." He looked up at her then. And this is what you need to know about men like Mr. Wilson. He was not cruel in a way he could ever be made to admit. He had a system. And the system was that people who inconvenienced him became inconvenient in return, and he could describe every step of it as fairness. You want hot water? Be a tenant in good standing. I'm in good standing. I have receipts for 19 months. Then bring me a full month and we'll talk about the boiler. She brought him a full month on day 14, in cash, counted out in the lobby with him watching, and he took it and wrote her a receipt in blue ballpoint and did not turn the boiler on. That was when she understood the shape of it. This was not about money. Nobody makes a woman heat a kettle for 26 days over money. Somebody wanted her out of the building. Now, let me take you back out to Gwacheon, because the two halves of her life were about to start bleeding into each other, and she did not see it coming. He came on Thursdays. Not every Thursday. 5 out of the next 7, at 5:15, always in the black wool coat, always without a scarf, and he never once explained why the chairman of a sports management and apparel conglomerate needed to be standing at a cold arena rail before dawn. Victoria did not ask. She had spent her whole adult life around men who wanted to be asked, and she recognized on sight that this one did not. What they did instead was talk about horses, which is how people who cannot say anything real to each other yet manage to say a great deal. "Your mare is bored," she said on the second Thursday, sweeping. "She is not my mare. She is in stall 9 of your barn. She is registered to my grandmother." He watched Bright drink. "The papers are in a safe on Ulungdo. My grandmother has not been able to walk out to a barn in 3 years, and she still asks about her every Sunday, so no, she is not my mare." Victoria filed that. She could not have told you why. On the 4th Thursday, he said, "Your knee." She kept sweeping. "What about it?" "You put your weight on the left going into the sand and on the right coming out. You have been doing it for a month. Either the ground is uneven, which it is not, because I paid for it, or you have an old injury on the right and you protect it downhill. You should be a doctor." "I have met enough of them." She heard that. She heard it the way you hear a chair leg give under a boy who does not flinch. She did not turn around, and she did not ask, and that restraint is the single reason he kept coming back. He was 26 years old and the chairman of everything, and the entire architecture of his life was built out of people asking him questions he did not want to answer. This is what she had already noticed and had said nothing about. He never leaned on the rail, not once, in 7 Thursdays. Every other man who stands at an arena rail leans on it full, folds his arms on the top board, hangs a boot on the bottom one. He stood 3 inches off it with his hands at his sides. Twice she saw him put the flat of his hand against the small of his back for about 2 seconds and then take it away. And on the 6th Thursday, at 4:40, before he had any reason to think anyone was in the building, she came around the corner of the equipment shed with a wheelbarrow and saw him in the empty round pen with his coat folded over the fence, walking a slow straight line, heel to heel, 1 foot directly in front of the other, with his arms out like a child on a curb. 9 steps, turn. 9 steps back. The staff called it discipline. The staff loved telling visitors that the chairman trained before dawn. Victoria had put in 14 years around athletes, and she knew a rehabilitation drill when she saw one. She backed the wheelbarrow up and took the long way around the shed, and she never mentioned it, not to him, not to anyone, and there were parts of his life she had only ever seen the edges of, and that was one of them.
That was the beginning of the thing between them. No declarations. Two people politely refusing to name what they had noticed about each other. Meanwhile, in Yuljiro, the subtraction continued. Day 19 of the cold water, Victoria came home to find her name gone off the mailbox. Not the box reassigned, just the label peeled off, the adhesive shadow still there. Her mail sitting loose on top of the row where anyone in the building could read the envelope from her school. Day 22, the stairwell light on the third floor stopped working.
Day 24, a notice appeared on the corkboard by the mailboxes, in Korean and English, announcing that unauthorized commercial activity by tenants was prohibited under the lease and would result in immediate termination. Nobody in that building ran a business. There were 4 apartments, and one of them belonged to a retired couple who sold nothing but opinions. Victoria read it twice and then went upstairs and sat on the edge of her bed with her coat still on, because she knew what it meant. Her sublet was not registered. It never had been. Mr. Wilson had preferred it that way, cash, no paperwork, and she had accepted it 2 years ago because it was 200,000 won cheaper a month and because she had been 31 and new and grateful. Which means she had no lease with her name on it, which means the address on her visa paperwork was an address she could not prove she was allowed to occupy. He could put her on the street in a week, and there was not one office in Seoul where she could file a complaint about it. She had thought she was 2 weeks late on rent. She was actually standing on a floor that had never been there. And on day 26, she found out who had told him. Thelma Wilson was waiting in the lobby with a camera bag, and she was wearing a coat that cost more than the sublet, and she was so pleased with herself that it came off her like heat off a radiator. "You never told me you rode," Thelma said. Victoria said nothing. "There's a picture of you, on the club's account, from the open house." Thelma turned her phone around, and there it was, a wide shot of the covered arena. Staff at the rail, and off at the edge of frame, a tall woman in a barn coat holding a chestnut mare on a loose rope while 4 men stood well back. Somebody in the comments said, "You settle her better than the head groom." She likes me. That is not a skill. I showed my dad. Thelma put the phone away. Because I was confused, honestly. You're a school counselor, and you're working a second job out at a private club on a work visa that says one employer. She said it kindly. That was the part that took the breath out of the room. She said it the way you would tell someone their shoelace was untied. I told him you probably didn't know that was a problem. There it was. Not the rent, not the boiler. This. Under the terms of Victoria's visa, she was permitted one employer, and the second job in Gwacheon was cash, unreported, 4 mornings a week, and it was the only reason she had eaten in February. One phone call to immigration from a landlord with a grievance, and she would be on a plane inside 30 days with 412 students and 1 boy in a broken chair left behind her in a building where nobody would open his file again. Do you understand what Thelma was actually doing? She was not trying to get Victoria deported. She was trying to get her out of the building, out of the barn, out of a 3-foot radius around a man she had shaken hands with once. She had 4 seconds of eye contact and a blurred photograph, and when everything else in her life was borrowed, that fantasy was the only thing that was hers, and she was going to protect it the way people protect the last solid thing they have got. "What do you want?" Victoria said. "I want you to be honest with my dad." Thelma smiled. "He likes honesty. He'll probably help you find somewhere else. There are places in Nowon that are really reasonable. Nowon is an hour and 40 minutes from Gwacheon, and about the same from the school." "Thank you for the recommendation," Victoria said, and she said it so evenly that Thelma actually looked confused for half a second, the way people do when the reaction they rehearsed does not arrive. She went upstairs. She heated the kettle. She sat on the floor with her back against the bed and did not cry, because crying is a thing you do when there is somebody to hear it, and she ran the arithmetic instead. 23 days until the rent was due again. 940,000 won in the bank. A boy with 11 absences and a process starting. And on Monday, the process started. It came as an email, copied to 5 people, informing Victoria that in accordance with regulation, the student Chunho would be referred to a disciplinary review for chronic unexcused absence, and that the review letter would be entered into his permanent record. She was at the vice principal's door in 6 minutes. "You told me in February this was a family matter," she said. It was. And now it is a discipline matter because there is a form nobody would sign. Miss Dudley. He had his hand on a stack of papers, and he did not look unkind, and that was somehow worse. "The regulation is not mine. He is 16, his mother is in Busan, his father works nights and has not answered this school since October." Her voice did not rise. "This is the part I want you to sit with, because on the inside, she was in a full sprint. She was screaming at him from a great distance. She could feel the whole slow machinery of that building, grinding a kid into a paragraph, and what came out of her mouth was flat and professional and small. 'I am asking for 30 days. I will find the father myself.' 'You are not authorized to make a home visit.' 'Then authorize me. That is not how this works.' She stood there in a corridor with a broken chair in her office and no hot water in her apartment and no legal right to her own address, being told, in the politest possible language, that she was furniture. She said, 'Thank you for your time,' and she went back to her office and closed the door and wrote it all down, dated, in her own handwriting, in a notebook she had started keeping in February. Every conversation, every refusal, every name. She did not know yet what that notebook was for. She just knew that women like her do not get to say later that something happened. They have to be able to show it. Junho stopped coming to school on Wednesday. By Friday, it was 3 days. She called the emergency contact 4 times. She stood outside the building where the address said he lived, on a street off a market in Seongsu, for 40 minutes in the cold, and pressed a buzzer. Nobody answered, and she was not authorized to be there, and she went anyway. Saturday morning at 5:20 in Gwacheon, Bride dropped her head into Victoria's chest and stood there breathing, and Victoria put both hands flat on the mare's neck and let herself have exactly 1 minute of it. When she straightened up, he was at the end of the aisle. Not the rail this time. Inside, in the aisle. In the coat, at 5:20 on a Saturday, which was not a Thursday and not his pattern, and he was holding his phone in his hand like something that had just told him news. "They are asking for the papers on the mare," Raeyul Sunwoo said. "My uncle's lawyer. He wants to know who she is registered to and where the safe is and whether anything has been moved off the island." "Why?" "Because my grandmother stopped eating on Tuesday." He put the phone in his pocket. "They are not asking about a horse." He looked down the aisle at nothing for a moment, and then he looked at Victoria and said, in exactly the same quiet voice, "Somebody at my club has been asked to make a list of unregistered casual staff. The request came through a tenant association in Yuljiro, which is an interesting place for it to come from." The wash bay was dripping. Somewhere out in the dark, a horse kicked a wall once. "Miss Dudley," he said, "who is trying to get you fired?" She did not answer him that morning. She said, "Your mare needs her feet done," and picked up the wheelbarrow, and he let her have it, because he was the only person in Seoul who understood that being handed a rescue is its own kind of eviction. The grandmother died 9 days later, on a Sunday, in the private wing at Ulleungdo Hospital, at 4:12 in the afternoon. Victoria found out from a group text sent to all barn staff instructing them to hang black ribbon on the arena gate. The will was read 11 days after that, in a conference room at the end of that same hospital wing, because the family had not left the island, and the lawyer had been instructed to read it where she had signed it. 15 people. A pot of barley tea, nobody touched. An uncle in a beautiful gray suit sitting closest to the door, which is where men sit when they have already counted the votes. And one American woman in the second row of chairs, in the only black dress she owned, who had received a courier envelope at her school office on a Thursday with a plane ticket in it and a single line of instruction, and who had spent the entire flight trying to work out which of her two lives she was being punished for. The lawyer was 60-something and read the way a metronome keeps time. He read the preamble. He read the schedule of charitable bequests. He read the disposition of the residence in Seongbuk, the apartment in Osaka, the sums to the household staff, one of them 40 million won to a woman who had cooked for her for 22 years, and the uncle looked at his watch twice. Then the lawyer turned a page and said, Article 11, Voting Interest in Sunwoo Sports Holdings. The room went still in the particular way rooms go still when everyone in them has been pretending not to care. The deceased's voting interest is not distributed to individual heirs. It was transferred on the 14th of last October into an irrevocable foundation, the purpose of which is the support of athletes with career-ending injury. The foundation's chair is designated as the sitting chairman of the company for so long as he holds that office. 14 months of a barn at 5 in the morning, and an old woman on an island had been quietly moving the ground under her own family's feet for a year. The uncle said, October. The 14th, said the lawyer. She was medicated in October. She was examined by 2 physicians on the 13th and the 15th. Both letters are attached as Exhibits C and D. The lawyer did not look up. That was the whole performance. He did not need to look up. Raeyul Sunwoo sat with his hands flat on his knees and did not smile and did not move. And Victoria, who had spent 14 years reading athletes, watched him breathe out very slowly through his nose once and understood that he had not known either. Then the lawyer said, Article 14, Livestock. He read a registration number. He read the mare's name. The chestnut Hanoverian mare, registered Bright, is bequeathed to Victoria Dudley of Memphis, Tennessee, United States of America, together with a maintenance trust sufficient for the animal's board, farrier, and veterinary care for the duration of her natural life. Somebody in the third row said a word in Korean that the interpreter did not translate. The bequest carries 2 conditions, the lawyer said. First, the mare is not to be sold. Second, Miss Dudley is appointed the Foundation's Director of Equestrian Programs at a stated salary with employer sponsorship of her residence and work status, effective on probate. And then, because he was a careful man and the deceased had been a careful woman, he read the last paragraph of the article aloud in full, in the flat voice of a man reading a shipping manifest. I have never met this woman. My grandson has described her to me for 41 weeks, and I have had the club's records checked, and I know who she was at 19 years of age and under what name, and I know what it cost her to say nothing about it in a country that would have paid her for the story. She settles my mare in 11 seconds. Everyone else in that building needs 4 minutes and a chain. I am old, and I am dying, and I am tired of watching capable women stand at the edge of the photograph. Nobody in that family had ever asked Raeyul what he did on Thursday mornings. His grandmother had asked him every Sunday for 41 weeks, and they all thought she was asking about a horse. The memorial was held 8 days later in the courtyard of the club in Gwacheon, because the foundation was announced the same morning, and the Korean sports press was invited to both. 40 cameras. Sponsor banners. A row of chairs for the family. The uncle in the second row now, which in that world is a demotion you can photograph. The event company staffing it sent 4 people. One of them carried a camera bag and had been telling colleagues for a week that she knew the chairman personally. Victoria was to walk the mare out on a loose rope at the end of the address. 30 feet, turn, stand, that was all. She had walked it twice at 5:20 that morning in the dark, and Bright had put her head against her chest at the turn, both times, unpaid, unregistered, out of habit. At 11:38, the chairman finished speaking, and Victoria walked out into the courtyard with a 1,200-pound animal on a slack line and 40 cameras coming up at once. At 11:39, a woman standing 9 feet to the left of the mare's shoulder raised the camera with an external flash and fired it twice, fast, at head height, and then let the bag she was holding fall off her shoulder onto the flagstones. You have never heard a sound like that horse coming off the ground. Bright reared, the rope ran out. The front row of chairs went backward all at once, and a man in the sponsor line screamed, and there was a 6-year-old boy in the second row holding a program, and there was nowhere for 1,200 pounds of frightened animal to come down except into people. Victoria did not pull. She stepped in. 3 feet from the shoulder, inside the danger, and she put no hand on the reins at all, and she turned the mare's hindquarters away from the chairs with 2 fingers on the rope and her own body angled at 45 degrees, and she said something to her that no microphone picked up. The mare came down on the flagstones and swung her hips and stood. 11 seconds. Victoria put her forehead against the mare's neck for one breath in front of 40 cameras, and then she turned around, and Raeyul Sunwoo was already standing 4 feet behind her with his hands at his sides. "Do not move," she had said to him without saying it. He had not. He walked past her to the woman with the camera. The courtyard was silent. Every lens in Korea was pointed at his back. "Miss Wilson," he said, and it carried, because quiet carries. On the 9th of March, your father shut off the hot water in Unit 3 of a building on Yuljiro Row and left it off for 26 days. On the 19th, her name came off the mailbox. On the 24th, a notice about unauthorized commercial activity went up on a corkboard in a building where nobody has ever run a business. On the 2nd of April, a request for a list of unregistered casual staff at this club arrived at my head groom's desk through a tenant association. It was signed by your father. It was written from your account. I have the header. Thelma Wilson said, "That is not," and stopped. "You met me in October," he said, "in a line. I shook 60 hands in 9 minutes. I said thank you for your work tonight, because I say that to everyone." And here is where it turned. Victoria handed the rope to the head groom and crossed the courtyard, and she put her hand on Raeyul Sunwoo's forearm, and she said quietly, "Stop." He stopped. "If you finish that sentence, she is finished," Victoria said. And in 5 years, everyone remembers that a rich man destroyed a 24-year-old girl at a funeral, and nobody remembers what she did. She did not raise her voice. Not once in front of 40 cameras. I do not want her ruined. I want it on a record with a date on it. She took the notebook out of her coat pocket. Housing office, labor board, immigration, if it comes to that. And it might, and I will sit in that chair myself. She looked at Thelma. I have every conversation, dated, in my handwriting, since February. You are going to answer for it in a room with a form in it, same as the rest of us. Then she said the thing that undid him, though he would not have used that word for another 6 weeks. I do not need to be rescued. I need to be believed. Those are different, and you are the only person here who knows it. 14 months later, on a Thursday, Victoria let herself into an office on the 28th floor of a building in Yuljiro, where the private banking lounge kept a table by the window for people the bank had decided were people. She was there to sign the foundation's quarterly disbursements. 11 athletes. 2 of them boys who had lost knees at 19. Raeyul Sunwoo came in at 5:15 out of habit, in the black wool coat, no scarf. "You are early," she said. "I'm always early. You are standing 3 inches off my chair." He looked at the chair, then he sat down in it, slowly, the way a man sits when sitting is a decision, and he let her see him do it, which took him longer than the will had taken to reshuffle a family. "There is a specialist in Osaka," he said, "in November." "I know. I booked the flight." "You booked too." "I did." He put his hand flat on the table between them, palm up, the callus showing. She put hers in it. Nobody said anything for a while, and the elevated road hummed 28 floors below them, the same road that used to hum through her window frame while she counted cash on a counter. Thelma Wilson still works at the event company. She was not ruined. She simply became a person other people stop talking about when she enters a room, which is a longer sentence than any of them expected. Junho graduated. His father signed the form in a housing office corridor, in blue ballpoint, with Victoria standing there. She had learned that being underestimated is not the same as being invisible. It only feels that way from the inside. She had learned that the quietest person in the room is usually the one holding the rope. She had learned that a woman with a dated notebook can move something a woman with a scream cannot. And this is the part I keep coming back to. That envelope came back under her door once, folded, with a smiley face on it. Last month, an envelope went under a different door, into a barn office in Gwacheon, and it held the registration papers for a chestnut Hanoverian mare. In her own name, both names, the one on her visa and the one on the trophy shelf in Memphis. She did not need anyone to slide it back. If this story meant something to you, drop a comment and tell me the smallest gesture that undid you, the little thing he did that said more than any speech could. If you are new here, subscribe and turn on notifications, and I promise the next story will be even harder to walk away from. Thank you for watching until the very end. I will see you in the next one.